Welcome back to episode 72 of the Owl Triangle podcast. Ian O'Neill, Andy Stevenson, and Caoilte Barra here to bring you all the latest news in Irish mixed martial arts. And I guess the biggest story that is circulating right now in the world of mixed martial arts, and in particular Irish mixed martial arts, is that of the Conor McGregor trial. On Friday, the 22nd of November, Conor McGregor was found civilly liable for assault by a jury in Dublin's High Court. The court heard that the assault was sexual in nature, with Nikita Hand alleging that she was raped by Conor McGregor and James Lawrence. After a trial of almost 2 weeks, the jury found that Conor McGregor was liable for assault, whereas they found that Lawrence was not liable for assault. It's important to note that this was a civil case. It was not a criminal one, meaning that the burden of proof was on the balance of probabilities rather than beyond reasonable doubt. Nikita Hand was awarded close to €250,000 in damages by the jury. Conor McGregor has continued to deny the allegations and signalled on social media that he intends to appeal the court's ruling. Obviously, this is a very, very difficult scenario for us to always comprehend and to cover. But, as we said on previous episodes, we were going to wait until the trial was all said and done. And we decided this week that we were going to bring in Clodagh Meaney, who's a Sunday World journalist and the assistant producer of the Crime World podcast, to answer a couple of questions. And it was very important that we got Clodagh on, she was actually live in attendance at the trial. She was in the courtroom, and we figured that she was the perfect guest for us to ask questions to and give some insight that, maybe some other people may not have heard of certain things that were going on in the courtroom as opposed to what was being reported out in public. So I think we're going to start today's podcast off by heading straight over to Clodagh to talk about this trial. We are now joined by the senior assistant producer of Sunday World's Crime World podcast, Clodagh Meaney. Clodagh, thank you very much for joining us today. Before we get into the details of the trial itself, Clodagh, I'm just wondering if you could give the listeners maybe a brief background of yourself and your involvement in covering this trial overall.
Yeah, so I'm a journalist with the Sunday World newspaper in Dublin. I started there just over 3 years ago now. I've been working as a producer with Crime World, the podcast, for the last 2 of those years, and my time there has involved not only producing the podcast, but also I've been covering trials, and most recently I've covered the trial of Conor McGregor, the civil trial which took place at the High Court, which just came to an end there a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, nice. Obviously, we had been listening along to that podcast. We were very impressed at the way that was covered, and we're glad that we can have you on here to discuss the case as well. And I guess one of the key elements of that trial was the fact that it was a civil case and not a criminal one. So for maybe the benefit of anybody who does not understand the difference between the two, I'm wondering if you could kind of give a brief explanation on the difference between the two, please, Clodagh.
Yeah, so my understanding of it is, and again, I'm just saying my understanding of it because I'm not a lawyer or anything like that, but basically a criminal trial is something that is taken by the state, so the Director of Public Prosecutions. So in this case, we might go on to talk about, there was a file from the Gardaí sent to the Director of Public Prosecutions, but they decided not to pursue a criminal charge. Whereas, and in a case like that, in a criminal case, the burden of proof, so the jury or whoever is deciding the verdict of that case, whether it be, a judge in a three-trial judge setting in a court, or in this instance, it was a jury in a criminal trial, the burden of proof, so they have to believe that this happened, whatever the crime is that the person is being tried for, happened beyond a reasonable doubt. So they have to be 99.9999% sure that they agree that this crime happened and this person committed the crime on this date, on this time. With a civil trial, it's a lot different. So the burden of proof is only 51%. So it means you have to be sure that this, and it's not a crime, it's this civil incident, whatever it is that they're being sued for, this happened on this date, on this time, and you're more than sure that it happened. So you're 51% sure it happened. It's more likely that it happened than it didn't happen. So the burden of proof is a lot lower, but it's still the same kind of rules apply for the media in terms of reporting on those cases. And I suppose in this instance as well, it was brought, Nikita Hand was alleging that she had been raped by Conor McGregor, so that is covered. She was suing for damages for assault, and the jury had to believe, more likely or not, that had happened.
Yeah, indeed. Obviously, like this was a very, it was kind of a difficult case to kind of understand, and a lot of intricacies in that case. What challenges did the difference of the burden of proof pose for each side on this one, Clodagh?
I think with this one, I suppose, I mean, for the challenges, I suppose I would assume Conor McGregor's legal team would have come up with the fact that they have to, in a criminal case, it is the job of the lawyer, the solicitor, the senior counsel to create that reasonable doubt, to put the idea in the jury's mind that it is reasonable that it is doubtful that this happened. Whereas with a criminal case or with a civil case like this one, they obviously have the task of convincing the jury that that there's that 2% kind of variable there of they have to believe. Nikita Hand's senior counsel obviously wanted to convince the jury beyond the 51%, whereas they had that 49%, obviously the other side, but they also had the challenge of convincing up to 51% this didn't happen. So there will be their kind of difficulties in that sense. I suppose they would see that as a challenge more so.
Clodagh, one of the reasons why we wanted to get you on was 'cause you were obviously on the ground. Am I right in saying that you were there pretty much every day at the trial?
Pretty much every day, yes.
Yeah, so I imagine like you'll have a lot of kind of context or experience there that we won't have had, obviously following along with reports from people that were at the trial. But I suppose to get started, what was the atmosphere like inside the courtroom? And I suppose how did McGregor and Hand present themselves, kind of throughout the trial?
At the very beginning of the trial, so I started covering from the second day. So Nikita Hand was on the stand giving her evidence, and during that time, she was just heartbroken and devastated. She was very nervous, very shaken. She was finding it really hard to keep herself composed and get through answering questions. And I suppose as the trial went on, I think her strength also came through. She became stronger. She became more assertive in how she was answering questions under cross-examination. And those kind of those tears and stuff like that, that sort of emotion that she was having, that was under her own senior counsel asking her questions as well as during the cross-examination. But she seemed to get stronger as the days went on. And for McGregor, I suppose we didn't really see any of him until near the end of the trial. You're in a courtroom and there's no emotion or conversation around. You're not hearing what he's talking about with his family. You're not hearing what she's talking about with her family. You can only kind of see the expressions, and things seemed very normal on McGregor's side, I suppose, until he went onto the stand. And at that point, we had seen what has been described by Nikita Hand's legal team as the mask slipping. And this was something I spoke about on the Crime World just the other day, or even the episode that went out earlier this week. It was, he was on the stand across 2 days. So he was there on one afternoon and the following morning. And I felt like on the first afternoon, we were getting the Conor McGregor we all know and see in the media, the persona of the man, the showman, the notorious. And then, and that's when he had that kind of incident where he kind of burst out, shouting across the courtroom. And then the next day it was a very different story. And I don't know if, he'd been told off by his solicitors or whatever it might have been. But, the next day it was more placid and he was more composed. And that is something, you would see. It is not a regular thing for somebody who is under cross-examination to have those kind of outbursts. And I suppose it was, everyone was kind of shocked that it had happened because it hadn't happened at all throughout the trial. And it's something as a journalist you would rarely see something like that happening on the stand.
What actually happened? Because obviously, we kind of didn't have the context that you kind of saw references to, and I noticed that I think it was both the just making sure I'm using the correct terminology. So I'm going to say Hand's counsel and McGregor's counsel in their closing statements both referenced something in relation to this. What exactly happened?
So there was those two periods of time. So the first afternoon and the second morning when he was on the stand. So on that first afternoon when he was on the stand, there was a couple of little things that happened. So I think the first thing that happened was he had used the phrase, and again, when I'm reporting on this and I'm taking notes in the courtroom and I'm coming back and I'm reading out what was said in court, I can't obviously, interpret the emotions for the audience, because it's up to the jury in themselves in that moment to interpret the emotions or whatever it might be in that present time. But obviously now we can talk about it a bit more. But at the time, I suppose he had used the phrase "lovely ladies" to describe Nikita Hand and Danielle Keely, and that didn't go down well with the jury at all. There was kind of an audible gasp from the jury, and this was referenced in his senior counsel's closing statement. Then he used the phrase "bombastic" to describe Danielle Keely at one point, which didn't go down well with them either. And then he was describing the photograph he got from Nikita Hand that evening. So that evening he said he received a photograph from her on Instagram. And I'm actually not sure how that all worked, because she said she tagged him in something and he said it was a message he got, but it was like, close friend stories, but I don't think close friend stories were around at the time. But he kind of used his hands to make sort of a lurid gesture, sort of, and I can't remember if it was like this kind of thing to describe maybe her boobs, or if it was kind of a describing of a slender waist sort of thing. But he definitely made some sort of gesture like that with his hands, and that received kind of gasps from the jury. They were, visibly disgusted by it, I would say. And then he was being questioned and cross-examined about his mobile phone and why he didn't give that into evidence, and he sort of said, "Here, you can have it now, pal," and kind of threw it at the senior counsel for Nikita Hand. And then of course he had this kind of mask slip outburst, as it was described, where he said he wanted all the evidence before the court, and at this point he sort of got up in his chair and was kind of pointing over, directing this sort of anger towards Nikita Hand, and he said something along the lines of, "I want the evidence of that taxi driver you were sucking a fucking dick in the back of the car," something along those lines. It all happened very fast, but those are the kind of words that I was able to pick out from it. Another journalist kind of picked out from it. So that was kind of, yeah, and again, like you said, you're seeing these reports, you're reading these things, and unless you're kind of in the courtroom, and I wasn't even there for every single day, but unless you are there every single day like the jury are, it can be hard to read the tone of what's being said, and to read the sort of the nuances and to it as well. So
yeah, and thanks for that. And there was a lot, like this trial obviously went on for a long period of time, and there was so much detail and evidence on both sides that were presented from the various counsels. And I'm conscious that, without going into every single piece of detail, which would be impossible here, and we don't want to take up your entire night, but I suppose, what were the most compelling pieces of evidence or testimonies that was, I guess, presented by Nikita Hand's legal team, and then conversely, McGregor's legal team would have, defended against? I know that like some of the main or the most commonly referenced pieces were like the CCTV footage and the forensic details and testimonies from medical experts. What would you say were the most, I guess, compelling pieces of evidence on both sides?
The CCTV, I suppose, yeah, that's been a huge point of conversation, and people have been, we did a Q&A on it last week, and people have been asking us, will the CCTV ever be published, and can we see it and stuff like that? And the answer is, unless it's leaked, it's not going to be, it's not like America. Crime journalists would be in a great position in Ireland if we could get our hands on all the evidence and make the documentaries they can in the US. But no, that probably won't come out. But it has been of such public interest, and I suppose that CCTV was 45 minutes long. We were sort of presented it by, it was put into evidence by Nikita Hand's legal team, so they were using that as their evidence, and they obviously cross-examined her about it. So they were asking her questions: what's going on here? Is this you? Is this the shot? Is this the hair salon where you worked? Do you remember going in the lift and stuff like that? And Nikita Hand had this very kind of visceral response to the CCTV. I believe she had seen it prior to the trial, probably 2 or 3 years ago, she said was the last time she had seen it. And she couldn't remember a lot of it. And I think for her, it was very compelling, I suppose, as an onlooker, because you're watching this woman who was seeing the CCTV footage of a blackout that she had, and you're seeing her watching back, filling those gaps of memory for the first time in a long time, and you could see that kind of physical reaction that she was having to that, and I thought that was very compelling. I suppose the other side as well is that, and she had to stop, asked to stop and take breaks during it and stuff like that, and she really didn't want to rewatch it. She'd would look away when she was being cross-examined on it, and it wasn't because, you know, she said, I agree that if that's me in the CCTV and you're saying it was this time, that time, I agree, I just don't want to have to watch it again. But then obviously then there was this voice note that her boyfriend Stephen at the time had recorded when she came home from the Christmas party. So this was the Sunday night after she had left the hotel, she'd gone to her friend's house, and then she got home to him and said that she had been raped, and he covertly did an audio recording of her. And this audio was presented by Conor McGregor's legal team, so it wasn't part of Nikita Hand's case. It was part of Conor McGregor's case. In the audio, which was again about 45 minutes long, I think 50 minutes ish, which is played in full to the court. That was pretty compelling to hear, because you're hearing the raw emotion of the moments after this had happened, after she was kind of confronting what had happened to her. And, you know, there was a lot of people saying, well, why did Conor McGregor's legal team use this? Or, you know, what was their reasoning for using this? And I'm not sure. I think a lot of people said it looked better for Nikita almost, because it was kind of showing, you know, her reaction to what had happened in that moment. And it's very I suppose, in most of the trials I would cover, you know, there'd be criminal trials, they're murder trials, and you don't actually ever get to hear directly from the victim. So seeing them on the stand is one thing, but then having that sort of video and audio from the aftermath is quite something else. And she, again, was, you know, very distraught listening back to that. It was something that she hadn't heard in a long time. Now, Stephen, the ex-boyfriend, didn't actually appear at the trial at all, giving evidence for either side. But that was quite something to listen to.
Yeah, it seemed that like the CCTV was definitely something that that Remy Farrell, Conor McGregor's senior counsel, you know, was very heavily focusing on, and obviously, you know, you kind of spoke earlier on about the difference between the civil and the criminal case. We obviously haven't seen the CCTV, so it would be impossible for us to kind of provide any opinion on it. And I'm not necessarily asking you to provide an opinion on it, but I suppose, like, what did you see in it? And how do I ask this? Would the CCTV have been what would have made it difficult for the DPP to have prosecuted? I don't know if you can answer that necessarily yourself, but it seemed that the McGregor's legal team were referencing it a lot.
Yeah. So throughout the trial, when the CCTV, when we seen it in the courtroom, when in our reporting, so that obviously, the point of the media being there is obviously to be the eyes and ears of the public, right? But you also, in that, have a duty not to, you know, step outside of what the jury are hearing. So when we watch the CCTV, we can only describe it using the terminology used by the senior counsel, be that Nikita Hand's or Conor McGregor's. So if somebody is, you know, there was actually a part where Nikita Hand was dancing, but, you know, let's say, you know, she was dancing with her top and she was swinging it around, something like that was happening in the CCTV. It wasn't, but if it was, and neither senior counsel brought that up, we couldn't actually reference that happening. We could say we see Nikita Hand on screen at this time or whatever, but unless it was said, obviously afterwards we can go back and go into it in that way, because we're not supposed to be interpreting the evidence for the jury, right? So what we've seen, roundabout way to get to answer your question, but just to explain sort of the process of why we weren't able to say things during the trial, and we kind of can a bit more now. But yeah, I suppose the CCTV opens with it's like from a camera outside of the hair salon where Nikita Hand worked. You can see Conor McGregor pulling up, and, you know, they get into the back of the car, it drives off. Then it's seen at like various points of, you know, there's like CCTV from a garage and stuff next door, and they drive by, and it's sort of just the timing of them leaving, going away from there. And then I think the next part of the CCTV was in the basement of the car park. So the majority of the CCTV footage came from a CCTV camera that was in the basement or the car park of the Beacon Hotel, and also inside the lift. So a lot of the CCTV footage was just, and again, at the beginning, we were watching the CCTV, and it wasn't until, you know, a couple of days on and they bring something else up about it that, you know, where was your coat? there was this 20-minute gap where you've gone somewhere. Even though we had known there was a gap, we couldn't speculate about what had actually gone on at that time. But yeah, a lot of the CCTV was just those two cameras. And I suppose, you know, it's in a lift, and it just kind of is, it's showing the different timestamps of what's going on. And again, at the start, we're seeing this because we think we're just seeing the timestamps, but then when it starts getting to the text messages and stuff like that, the jury obviously have a copy of that as well, so they can kind of cross-reference this. And what I was talking about with the footage of Nikita Hand dancing, this was I think around 6 o'clock in the 6:30. So she had originally told in her own testimony that she jumped out of bed, texted Stevenson, I'm having a great time, I'm fine, because she had been panicking about him being worried about her. But then when we get to the CCTV footage, we see that the timestamp actually matches, that she was in the basement, she was in the car park, and she sort of, you know, is in a corner on her phone, and then jumps up and sort of puts her hands in the air, and then they go back inside. And that's sort of the victory dance, as it was described as. But that's kind of what is seen in it. And I suppose we can also see Nikita Hand in the lift. Herself and James Lawrence were going up and down in the lift and back around for ages. And it wasn't until about, you know, a couple of more days into the trial we find out it's because they could only get as far as the first floor, and they were trying to get back in. They were trying to get a security guard and stuff like that. And there was an instance as well where they had gone off in CCTV. I think they went back to the room. She got her coat and her shoes. They drove off for 20 minutes and then came back and went up to the hotel room. I'm trying to think what else we've seen in the CCTV. It was mostly, again, when she was watching back and she was seeing herself sort of stumbling around the lift. She had said that, you know, she was very upset about this because, again, she had said that she had had a blackout during this time, and her emotional reaction to actually seeing what was going on during that time was that she had just seen a drunk, vulnerable woman. But Conor McGregor doesn't really even appear in it much. He's seen going into the hotel. He's seen in the lift going up, he's seen in the lift coming down, and the lift then leaving, and that's it. The rest of it is sort of Nikita Hand and James Lawrence in the lift going up and down various different times.
The other kind of key, or well, the other piece of evidence that was referenced that we wouldn't have seen as well was, I believe, the photographic evidence was presented in the court. Did you see any of this evidence, and can you describe, I guess, what you saw?
Yeah, so when the photographic evidence is presented in court, they're in like sort of albums. So the media aren't actually given copies of this. The public gallery aren't given copies of this. It's only for the witness on the stand, obviously, to say, is this, you know, X picture, Y picture, and agree or look at whatever it might be. And obviously the jury have a copy of it as well for their own deliberations. But as it happened, you know, I think the public probably seeing quite a lot more of the photographic evidence than we did, because the public gallery actually hung over where the jury box was. So when they had their, you know, the albums open, they would have been able to see some of the stuff. Just because I was sitting right in front of her legal counsel, I could see some of the injuries to her breast in one of those photographs. Other than that, there was none. The only other piece of evidence that we had seen in court that was not, you know, shown to the public was the jumpsuit that she had worn that night. There was pictures of it as well, I believe, and pictures of her underwear as well in those photograph albums, and I think there was pictures of the hotel room and different things like that. But the jumpsuit was actually in court, they took it out, and it was just as an exhibit. The jury I don't think they were given that as an exhibit as part of their deliberations, but it was just sort of, this is the evidence that we took that day. Here is the damage on it. Is this your jumpsuit? Yes or no, that sort of thing. And that was obviously in the courtroom, but it wasn't entered into evidence, or, you know, there was no pictures of it available for the public.
Clodagh, the verdict came then, and Conor McGregor was officially found civilly liable for assault. The wording here seems to have confused a lot of people. Are you able to provide a bit of insight into why it was worded that way?
So is this in relation to the question that was put to the jury, or in the way that it was kind of presented to, you know, worded by the media in the aftermath?
I guess worded by the media, because you see it reported in various different ways across different media publications. Yeah,
so I suppose, so to be branded, I suppose, and this is kind of in a general context, to use the phrase rapist to describe somebody who hasn't been found criminally liable for rape which he wasn't. He was found civilly liable for assault, which I'll get back into. But that's why kind of that phraseology is not used. And as well, the phrase guilty, not guilty, that's not used in this setting either, because those are criminal terms. The phrase that we had been using and that was used across most of the media was that Conor McGregor is civilly liable for the assault of Nikita Hand on this day, on this time. It is worded that way because that's legally factual, okay, it's, first of all, but it's also the question that was put to the jury was, is Conor McGregor civilly liable for assault on Nikita Hand this day, this time, yes or no? And the answer, of course, is yes. So I suppose the media phrasing came from that question. Also, I suppose in terms of James Lawrence, and he was found not civilly liable. So that's why we kind of use that phrasing rather than guilty, not guilty. And as well, I suppose a lot of people are kind of like, well, why is civilly liable for assault? Like, where does rape come into it? Civil or assault in a civil case is an umbrella term. And then rape is a tort of assault, it's called. So it's sort of like it's one facet of that. So like there's many different types of assault, you know, under that term or under that umbrella. So that's kind of why it's worded that way, to keep it obviously factual, and as well to, you know, use any other phrasing and would suggest a criminal conviction. And of course that is not only incorrect and irresponsible, but it's also, you know, it's defamation of character.
Thank you for clearing that up. I imagine a lot of people will appreciate that.
I hope that made sense.
It did,
that
it really
makes
did.
sense. Yeah,
I think it was a question I think that was a lot of us had all along. Coming to the damages, Nikita Hand was awarded close to €250,000 in damages. Is there any insight into how the jury came to that amount?
No, there isn't, and I'm not sure. Like some of the damages that they were asked to consider, you know, like we heard on the stand, there was an actuary and there was a couple of different people like that who were able to kind of somebody gave evidence about how much it would cost for her to relocate, because that was one of the fees she was claiming for, damages so she could relocate, loss of earnings, different things like that. And some of the figures were between, you know, $500,000 to $1 million. And so I'm not exactly sure how they came to decide on what they decided. I don't know what sort of maths they, you know, scales or anything like that they might have had to help them come to that. Maths is far from my strong point anyway, but it seems like either way, I mean, there was another point as well about the difference between the criminal and the civil trial is only 9 of them had to agree with the verdict rather than the full 12. And with that as well, then only those 9, or if it was the full 12, 9, 10, 11, how many of it was of them that agreed on the verdict, they were the only ones that were allowed to be part of the discussions for the amount of damages.
I guess the follow-up question in terms of, I guess, speaking about the financial side of the trial here, and is the legal costs. And I'm aware there was due to be the hearing on legal costs on Thursday, but was postponed by a week. Was there any reason as to why it was postponed?
I'm not exactly sure. When I've seen an article earlier today, and it was very briefly saying that Conor McGregor's posts on the internet in the aftermath of the verdict might be something that Nikita Hand's legal team want to submit as part of their legal argument for the legal fees, or whatever way that's going to go. So I think it's due to take place this week again, and whether or not that goes ahead or it's going to be pushed out further is unknown. But that seems to be sort of the consensus. Now, that's not something that was heard in court. That was just an article that I had seen. I think the Independent had published one earlier on, but that seems to be the sort of the consensus of why it was pushed out. And again, they're probably, I mean, we don't know how that's going to go. Usually when you're liable for, so Nikita Hand obviously sued Conor McGregor. He was found liable for the damages. He would have to pay for her legal fees. She would obviously pay for his own, but it came out in court that he was also paying for James Lawrence's legal fees. However, he was not found liable for her, for the assault that the claim that she had taken against him. So it's kind of, it's very muddy waters, sort of, especially for us crime journalists are very used to things being black and white, guilty, not guilty. When it sort of comes to the money and stuff like this, it's a bit outside of our realm. But I'm sure it'll be a learning curve for us all. But we'll see, I suppose, what happens there, because I think everyone's very curious as to how they got to those numbers, and what that's going to mean for the fees.
The James Lawrence aspect of this was kind of, it's almost, not to say it's a side story, but like obviously the majority of the focus was on Conor McGregor in this case. So as you mentioned there, Conor McGregor was found civilly liable, whereas James Lawrence was not. Can you give maybe a very brief, I'm conscious of time, a very brief insight into how he became involved in this case? And because obviously that kind of confused things with the ruling as well at the end. I think a lot of people were confused by that.
Yeah, so I suppose before I go back to how he got involved with James Lawrence with the ruling, so basically the jury had two questions. Did Conor McGregor assault Nikita Hand? Yes or no? Did James Lawrence? Yes or no? If you said yes to either question, you proceed to then the damages. So they say yes, Conor McGregor, and they sort the damages. They say no, James Lawrence, and then they don't proceed any further. But with regards to his involvement in the case, he basically went to Gardaí a day after Conor McGregor was arrested and gave statements to the Gardaí to say that he had, James Lawrence went and he said, oh, I actually had consensual sex with Nikita Hand. And Conor at this point previous had not told Gardaí about it at all. I think in one of his second or third interview, he said, oh, I think she might have had sex with somebody else. And then the following interview, a couple of hours later, said, I think she had sex with James Lawrence. The next day, James Lawrence comes in and says, I had sex with Nikita Hand. They bring this to Nikita Hand and she is just shocked. She says, that didn't happen. We did not have consensual sex. And if we did have sex, it was not consensual because I don't remember it happening. So that's sort of how he became involved in it all.
I guess to move on to, the fallout of all of this as well, because obviously we're quite conscious of time with this. And we obviously look at things from an MMA perspective on the podcast. And we've seen a bit of the fallout as it is, and brands cutting ties and so on and so forth. But how do you think the ruling will affect McGregor's reputation, both in Ireland globally?
I mean, I don't know. It seems to have had this, and again, it might be living in an echo chamber here, but it seems to have had a knock-on effect on the public perception of him for sure. So many people have been saying, we had our comments on YouTube turned off during the trial, and we've only recently been able to turn them back on, obviously, in the aftermath. And people have been saying, I've been listening to this entire thing, and I've been following along with the news reports, and I've always been a fan of McGregor, but I'm not now. And people have slowly been coming away from him. And I don't know. I mean, Ireland is a small place. It's a small country. People don't forgive and forget and maybe move on as fast as they do in the US. Whether or not he has a life and a career there, I don't know. I suppose that's something as crime journalists we've been curious about is, do you guys in the MMA community, do you think he's going to have another fight? Is he going to go back to it? Because I know he had that injury and he was kind of long awaited that he would return to the octagon, but is that actually going to happen? I don't know. And I feel like the answer to that might be the answer to his future, because even if he doesn't go back to fighting, I mean, is he going to have a career in coaching, commentary, his financial endeavors here? I mean, he has his brands, he's got his stout and he's got his whiskey. Well, he had his whiskey that's been sold off now, but with that being pulled from shelves and stuff like that, I don't know if that's going to maybe damage him quite as financially. Maybe his reputation for sure has been damaged, but that's something we're wondering. Do you guys think he's going to fight again?
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it'll probably happen next year. It'll be interesting, of course. What he is concentrating on now is launching an appeal for this case as well. Based on what you have seen in court, Clodagh, how strong do you feel his case is for an appeal here?
I mean, I don't know. He'd have to have significant new evidence. I think what he had said in one of his tweets was that he was going to appeal on the basis that the judge misdirected the jury. So I don't know what evidence or what kind of part of that instruction he's going to pick apart and say this was a misdirection. For sure, I mean, he's like everyone, always entitled to appeal these decisions, but whether or not it will actually, he'll be able to lodge an appeal, and if for it to even go back to court is another story.
We spoke, like, obviously when Caoilte asked you about the damages and how outspoken he was on social media about the ruling of the court. How much do you feel that those comments may affect this appeal process for Conor McGregor?
I don't know. I mean, I definitely don't think he's made things easy for himself. Let's put it that way. He's definitely the judge that case was under, Judge Alexander Owens, is a very stern judge. He doesn't take shit, and I think he will take a view of distaste to it, because during the trial there was people with phones out. There was I think there was another instance where somebody had taken a screenshot of one of the screens, and he took that very seriously, and said you will be held in contempt of court for any of these transgressions. And I think anything outside of that as well, he will not look lightly at.
In terms of a timescale on when an appeal may come through, Clodagh, what does that look like? Obviously, the damages will have to be looked after first. Based on your experience, maybe, what timeline are we looking at? Maybe an appeal being launched, or whether we are going to get another kind of appeal case for this particular trial?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I really couldn't tell you that. I mean, I'm just looking at, there's a case I covered last summer, and again, I assume that the workload, the timescales for the civil and the high court, or the high court and the criminal court, probably around the same. I mean, that case, the guy who was found guilty of murder said that he was going to be appealing that, and that still hasn't come to court, and that's over a year and a half ago now. And again, people always do say that they will appeal. Now, whether or not they will go ahead and actually put in the appeal, it is very different. But we could be looking at another while. I really couldn't give you an answer on that one.
Is there a timeline maybe where Conor McGregor would have to put forth an appeal?
I think there is a limit, and I think it is something like 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Clodagh, I'm conscious that I've only got a couple more questions, and I promise we'll let you go.
Okay. You're okay.
But we didn't hear so when the verdict was reached, when the jury came to their decision, we saw Conor McGregor exit the court. We didn't hear from him. We've obviously seen tweets, etc., from him online. How did he react when the decision was delivered?
He was, for the first time, we had sort of seen, and again, I would say that this was another instance of the mask slipping, but in a very different way. We had first kind of seen, he looked vulnerable. He was red in the face. He was, shaking. There was tears had fallen. His mother and his sister had him arm in arm, one had one arm, one had the other arm. I had perceived that as they were comforting him. Other people had said that they perceived it as they were holding him down, or holding him back. It was for sure the first time that we had seen some sort of very different version of the Conor McGregor that we all know from the media, we all know from TV or social media, or whatever it might be, side to him that I'd never ever seen before. And I think that was quite an interesting thing to see from him. He sort of was very much a family united front that was presented on the final day of the trial when they all came with him. Of course, he was hand in hand with his fiancée Dee Devlin. He exited the court with her as well, with the cameras through a scrum of media, flashing lights straight into the car with her, and they seemed to hold strong together.
Obviously, we've focused, for the most part on Conor McGregor. We're an MMA podcast here, but we did hear from Nikita Hand after the fact. She delivered her statements to the media outside the court. She talked about the personal toll that the case has taken on her, and kind of emphasised the importance of speaking out. And I'm just wondering, in your opinion, how did her statements and her demeanour kind of resonate with the public and the media after the fact? She'd obviously detailed what she alleged was a very harrowing experience.
Yeah, I think she was standing I would say a metre away from me when she was giving that statement to the media, and you could just sense how fast her heart was beating. I really felt for her because she was walking out to, she was a relatively unknown, nobody, she's an unknown person before this. She had, had she gone through a civil trial, or had she gone through a criminal trial, she would have had the right to anonymity, and she would have maybe waived that right at the end, who knows. But in this case, she didn't have that legal protection of the anonymity as in a victim. And she came out of court, somebody with no experience of probably ever been in front of a camera like that before, walked straight up to a wall of lights and flashing cameras and, microphones just in her face, and delivered this really powerful speech. You could see the paper shaking in front of her, but she held it together so well. She was still so composed and calm and being able to get through that. And you could really see the emotion as well cracking when she spoke about her daughter. And I think that really resonated with the public. A lot of women, it resonated with a lot of women because, people who may or may not have gone through it and maybe have never been able to get that sort of vindication through the courts of what they've been through. It's sort of like reassuring, or kind of, reinforces the idea that, that you can be heard as a victim, and you can, be understood, and you can be believed. So I think a lot of people resonated with that. I think a lot of people resonated with just the pure emotion that she exuded.
Clodagh, I think we're all out of questions. Can't thank you enough for your time tonight. I know we've taken a lot more of it than we had bargained for, but we really appreciate you joining us. Where can people find you and find more of your work? And again, thanks for joining us today.
No problem. So you can find me on Crime World podcast, covering almost every day of the trial and the verdict. We've done some podcasts about the aftermath as well, if you want to hear more about sort of, again, even through the podcast, we couldn't just cover every single second of the trial, but we tried. And I suppose if I'm on social media, you can find me Clodagh Meaney. Yeah.
Thanks so much for taking the time, Clodagh. We really appreciate it. And all the best to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I just want to express thanks to Clodagh for joining us again. Obviously, it's a very difficult topic for us to navigate. We come on here into the Auld Triangle. We want to talk about fights, and we want to talk about Irish mixed martial arts from an amateur level, obviously, to professional level. But we felt it was important to highlight, obviously, the trial, to talk about the trial, and to get the information out there to everybody. So hopefully, we're trying our best to lay out all information to the best of our ability. So I think Clodagh did a great job, and we're just trying to do our best to navigate this topic. We can talk a little bit ourselves about the fallout and what has happened since the court ruling. And, we've seen, Andy, with this case now, a lot of the brands have now kind of distanced themselves from Conor McGregor after the ruling. We've seen proper 12 Irish whiskey being taken down off shelves, Forged Irish Stout, Tidal, the Hitman Games, all of these kind of brands who have now distanced themselves from their partnership with Conor McGregor. And, it's kind of understandable, I guess, given the ruling. But, these are the kind of ripple effects of what the court ruling has presented towards Conor McGregor. And, he's in a time right now, obviously, when he's processing an appeal. But the results of the ruling definitely is playing an effect right now on Conor.
Yeah, without a doubt. It seems that every single day there's something new, and obviously, we're kind of in a weird spot when we're recording this, because we kind of had a 2-week gap between kind of the ruling and when we're our next episode was. So a lot has happened, and a lot has continued to happen. So we're not going to get into every single detail of the case today, and I think it's been kind of widely covered. But as far as the fallout goes, we saw Hitman cutting ties. I think that was the first one that did, or the brand, whatever it's called, IO Interactive, and look, we'll make no bones about it, we'll be referring to some notes here today because there's just a lot that's gone on. But even outside of that, so we saw, the likes of Super Value, Centra, Musgrave, the Barry group, I think they're called, which would have like Centras and cost cutters and things like this. They've all delisted products associated with McGregor. Obviously, the Proper 12 one is very significant in the fact that, this was McGregor's company. He obviously sold it onto, I think, Proximo Sports is the name of the company now in 2021. But, they would have used his likeness. He was the face, he was Proper 12, and for them to make this decision, and look, while he hasn't been criminally convicted of anything, the allegations that were put forth in this trial are they're harrowing. Like, it's very, very grim stuff here. The forensic evidence, all of the allegations that were put forth, and the facts are that a jury of his peers decided that on the balance of probabilities that they ruled in favor of Nikita Hand's version of events rather than his. So this is the result. You're seeing the public response and the commercial response to allegations of those nature. Brands do not want to be associated with Conor McGregor right now, and it doesn't seem to be just. And of course, must say that he continues to deny these allegations, and he's moving forward with, or he says he's moving forward anyway with a appeals process. But like, the reality is, he was a very disliked person to a large segment of Irish society. This has enhanced those feelings and sentiments to no end. And now we're seeing, whereas previously it was all just public opinion, well now it's actually hurting his pockets. And I don't think I'll give my opinion on this. I didn't necessarily expect this to happen.
Something that I really didn't kind of, when everything was going on, it's something I never even took into an account as to the repercussions of what a particular ruling was going to be decided on by the jury. And yeah, it's come in a ferocious storm here, really, overall.
Yeah, and like, we've seen accusations and Conor McGregor in trouble with the law on a number of occasions previously, and this reaction has not come. So like, that speaks to the significance of, the ruling here, and the reaction to the reaction to this case, and to the contents of this case, I would assume. But it's not even just in Ireland. Like, we're seeing now, I think it was, I'm trying to get the detail here. It was Asda in the UK have now removed Forged Irish Stout from 500 of their locations. So, it's in Ireland, but it's also, we're seeing it now spill over into the UK. There's just a lot going on. I mean, we saw a protest, march through the streets of Dublin. I don't know how many people were at it, but you had figures in Irish society who, I think there was a woman, and apologies to her because I'm forgetting her name, but I think she had previously been assaulted, and this was a march that centered around violence towards women, but they focused this one on supporting Nikita Hand. So like, again, these are all just, I guess, examples of the public response in Ireland to this ruling and to this case. So it's like there's a lot going on, and forgetting a lot of things here, but yeah, there's been a significant response to the case.
I just like, obviously we've highlighted the effects that's having on these businesses and everything like that. Caoilte, I guess I'd kind of pose the question to you. Obviously, Conor has released statements saying that he wants to get back fighting, that fighting is the next port to call for him. How much at all, or do you think that this will have an effect on his fighting career going forward? I guess we've heard a couple of people ask the questions, will Conor McGregor fight again? I personally think Conor McGregor will fight again. I'm curious to hear what you think.
Yeah, like Claude asked us there in the interview, I do think he will fight again. I think that once his pocket's been hit now in multiple ways, I imagine, through a lot of the brands pulling back from him, and that's gonna hit, and he may lose further money going forward. He's got another case coming up with Artem Lobov, I believe, from reports I've seen. So his he'll be back to, he's going to be going, I understand he's a wealthy man, but he'll be going back to the primary source of income he first came upon, and which was through fighting. And maybe from a media kind of reception, and maybe the perception of the people in Ireland and maybe UK, I think he, for quite a lot of parts, I think that popularity diminished quite heavily in recent years, and I think it's going to be quite heavily damaged. But in terms of his career and being able to compete again, I don't think it will affect his ability to compete or his limit. I don't think he'll be limited by this. I think the UFC will still they'll still put him on cards. They'll still give him fights, find ways to make they'll make money off it too. He won't be. I can't imagine he'll be well received or as well received as he was previously. That will definitely, reputationally will have an impact. But no, I don't think it will have an impact on him competing in future.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way as well. And I mean, obviously, like, as Andy said before, he is denying he wants to appeal this, but whether that appeal is successful, whether that appeal is not successful, the headlines are there, and it's going to be a hard thing for Conor to shake off for the rest of his life, not even for his fighting career. We haven't heard anything from the UFC yet, Andy, obviously. We haven't heard anything from Dana White. Coming into a big pay-per-view card this weekend too, obviously, there may be some opportunities for questions to be asked to Dana White, and obviously to maybe Ian Garry on the card, and I think that's kind of another ripple effect here on the overall landscape of Irish mixed martial arts, and in particular somebody like Ian Garry.
Yeah, and I might get to Ian Garry in a little bit, but yeah, like as far as the ripple effects within Irish MMA, I mean, it how can it not have a ripple effect? I mean, MMA was already very much associated with Conor McGregor to the wider public in Ireland, and a sizable portion of that would have a negative, there'd be a negative connotation, I'd say, in my day-to-day dealings with and conversations with people that would be linked with Conor McGregor, and that's just the reality situation. And this will not help that at all. I mean, how could it possibly help that? This is, it will deliver another blow, this ruling to Irish MMA. And like, I think what I was thinking about over the last little while is, and look, obviously, as you mentioned there, yeah, like if this may change with an appeal, but the reality right now is Conor McGregor has been found civilly liable for assault, and the assault was of a sexual nature. And fighters up and down the country have for decades at this point, associated their own careers and their own ambitions and their goals and their aspirations with an idol that is Conor McGregor. And there will be a portion of fighters who will stand by him and believe in Conor McGregor still, and there will be a portion of fighters who won't and who will disassociate. And that's we haven't seen many people come out publicly talking about that, but this will be something that they will have to consider. Like, we've seen, I think Sinead Kavanagh is the only fighter that I've seen publicly come out and kind of show their support, and maybe others will follow. But fighters will need to probably make a decision as to whether they will want to discuss this in any means in a public forum, and if they do, which way they are going to go. So, and there may be, like, if we, and I'm going to be very careful how I phrase things as well. Like, there may be fight, for example, like Conor McGregor is SBG Ireland. Like, I believe he has a stake in SBG Ireland. There may be fighters, there may be women in Irish MMA who will feel a certain way about this, and that's a very difficult situation to be in. There also may be fighters who completely support Conor McGregor. Like, we don't know which way that lies. Everyone will have their own opinion. But the likes, the high profile fighters right now, the likes of Paul Hughes, who, who Bellator are kind of pushing this Ireland versus Dagestan 2, very much linking Conor McGregor. Bellator will need to make a decision. Do they want to continue on in this vein? Are they going to continue kind of making those associations? Like, these are the decisions that will have to be made one way or the other. Similarly, the likes of Ian Garry or anyone, and I don't mean to, I'm not naming people here to single anyone out. I'm just kind of using examples that this is the reality that many fighters will face. Ian Garry has has tied his career and everything about his UFC run has kind of been linked to Conor McGregor. Well, that means that when, as you mentioned, when Conor McGregor is involved in a civil suit like this, and when that result comes out and the jury makes their decision, well, then we've seen the public backlash, we've seen the commercial backlash. Well, then there will likely be questions posed to Ian Garry this week where, how do you feel about Conor McGregor now after this result has come out? Where do you fall in your opinion on it, etc., etc. And that's a very difficult position to be in, because it's, obviously they're nothing to do with the case, nothing to do with any sort of incident or anything relating to this, but the questions may and likely will be asked. I would expect the media to ask questions like these, and it's understandable that they would. So, sorry, I've kind of gone on a bit of a diatribe there, and I've been trying to pick my words very carefully here. But it's a very difficult situation for Irish MMA, for Irish MMA fighters, and obviously we're just, obviously for Nikita Hand, obviously I'm sure, for Conor McGregor himself, for Conor McGregor's family, for anyone associated with Conor McGregor, for anyone associated with Nikita Hand's family. But we're looking here right now at the wider effect on Irish MMA specifically. So yeah, those are that's kind of how I see it at the moment. Hopefully I've kind of, I don't know. Yeah, I'm kind of struggling on this one.
Yeah, no worries at all. But I mean, like I said, we'll find out this weekend, Caoilte, obviously with UFC 310 right around the corner, and obviously Ian Garry will be up answering questions this week as well. It'll be interesting to see. We'll probably get the first look at maybe what it might look like for an Irish mixed martial artist to have to answer certain questions around this trial. But it's a very difficult topic to kind of work around, and like I said, we did our best. We could have just asked those questions, and it is what it is. Very difficult. Let's be real, very difficult for all of us here. I don't want to speak for the two lads, but definitely for me to navigate and try and do this. Like I said, we're not legal experts. We're have never covered a topic like this on the podcast as serious before, so. It'll be interesting to see what happens moving forward. Andy, any final thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, just agreeing with you there that it is very difficult, and people will feel very strongly and laying our cards on the table. There will be people who won't like this coverage or will like. I've no idea. Hopefully we've covered it. Okay, we're doing our best. Obviously, there'll be some people will feel incredibly strongly on Nikita Hand's side, and will point to a lot of the medical evidence that was heard, which was, the allegations were absolutely disgusting and harrowing. And then there will be a portion that will still fall on the Conor McGregor side that will point to the likes of the CCTV footage, etc. So I don't think it's very I've being completely honest, I find this very, very difficult to cover. So we're trying to do our best, and hopefully we have done that. But we've to the best of our abilities anyway.
Any final thoughts, Caoilte?
No, I think you've spoken very well there, Andy, about it all. It is, it's very difficult to navigate. As what you were mentioning before there, Ian, about this weekend and how we might see the first look of a question being asked. That we may see that not even happen. The UFC may not want that to happen, may not even allow. Hard to know yet. So it will be interesting to see, and how even fighters navigate that question as well, because we've yet to see a fighter being asked about this. Even we've yet to see the UFC being asked about this, because the UFC have. I'm not sure if surprisingly or unsurprisingly have not released anything about this, considering it is an athlete that's under contract. This weekend could potentially, be very intriguing to watch from that perspective things as well. But so I was just onto that point. But overall, this has obviously been very difficult to navigate for all of us, and we've done our best here really to try and navigate in the right direction.
All right, obviously Ian Garry and Shavkat Rakhmonov is happening this weekend, one of the biggest Irish mixed martial arts fights in history. We said we felt it was important to cover this fight as well. So let's do that. I mean, huge opportunity here, Caoilte, for Ian Garry to come in against the labelled boogeyman of the division, Shavkat Rakhmonov, 18-0, all finishes. We talked about it in previous episodes as well. The set of balls that Ian Garry has on him to come in here in 3 weeks' notice to take on a challenge like this in Shavkat Rakhmonov. How much of a chance do you think that he has in getting the job done against a guy like Shavkat? Like, I think there's a good possibility he can get the job done here if things go his way.
I think he's the underdog in the odds, and sometimes, you know what, people look into that a bit too much. He's all the chance in the world. It's over 5 rounds. We've not seen Shavkat go 5 rounds. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Ian's had that experience that we've seen in Cage Warriors of competing in 5 rounds. They're both undefeated. We've seen them both rise up. Shavkat obviously has all the finish. He's got all these finishes. He's the boogeyman for a reason. Ian Garry's looked better at every fight. He's kind of come into his own and stepped up to the occasion every single time that he's had to. And this time he's come in, saved the day, and he's a massive opportunity. And I mentioned in the previous podcast where they've trained together before. They understand how each other fight, how they train, everything. They probably know little bits about each other and how they from sparring and how they fight just from that time around each other and the training partners. So it'll be interesting to see that, and if that plays into one person's strengths, so on and so forth. But I think he has every chance to win this. Someone's always got to go, and it is so exciting from a Irish MMA perspective, and that kind of big fight feel, excitement beforehand is there now. That to a point that it's crept up so quickly. It's mad. So let's see, but every chance in the world to win this one. I think people have written him off maybe a little bit too early from maybe some of the reaction I've seen online, but no, every chance.
Yeah, looking at the odds on this, I think the lads mentioned it on the big podcast as well, that, the odds are heavily handy here in Shavkat Rakhmonov's favour. I think Ian Garry, I think he's a plus 300 on some betting websites. That seems very far from what it should be, Andy. I think this, maybe it's the fact that it is down to short notice. Maybe, it might be different if both of these guys were coming in on full camps. We have to highlight the fact that Shavkat Rakhmonov is taking this fight on short notice as well. But this is going to be a close fight, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Shavkat is the rightful favourite coming into this, but I think those odds are wide in my opinion. You look at Shavkat, he's 18-0, 18 finishes. It's completely understandable that he is seen as the boogeyman of the division. It is understandable that he is seen as the favourite here against Garry. But at the same time, I think a lot of people's opinion on Ian Machado Garry is skewed by their perception of his personality. I think, we're well aware of the online kind of backlash that he oftentimes receives, and I think that feeds into people's opinions about him, when the reality is he's an incredibly skilled martial artist. He's one of the best fighters in the world, and to your point, a 5-round fight, we haven't seen Shavkat dragged into deeper waters. We don't know what he looks like there. We have seen Ian go the distance. Now, I would say also maybe the fact that Ian's last performance against Michael Venom Page, maybe people thought that, he should be going in there and blowing the doors off them, which I think is a completely unrealistic expectation of anyone against Michael Venom Page. Perhaps that's fed into this as well. But I think the benefit for Ian is that, coming in here as an underdog, as a heavy underdog, or, a wide underdog here, he has a huge opportunity to upset the apple cart and to finally kind of make people realize that, you can have whatever opinion you want about him, but I feel like he has the opportunity to turn the tide.
Yeah, I think that's where you were going. I'm sorry for interrupting you as well. I think that with him taking this fight, we have seen a little bit of a turning of the tide, where people just got caught up in the madness of his of the situation that was surrounding him. When everyone wanted to talk about what was going on in his personal life and spreading lies and misinformation about those kind of things as well. what I was happy and what I think all of us did was, we didn't feed into any of that. What do we want to do? We want to feed into Ian Garry as a fighter, and what he can produce as a fighter. And I think, he's always said anytime, anywhere. And I think he's lived up to that kind of mantra as well by taking this fight at such short notice and proving that. And in certain ways, I feel that, that will win back some of the quote unquote haters with him in this particular case.
Look, we talked about it on the last episode. It's how can you hate a guy who's willing to step in on short notice and face the guy that everyone else seems to want to avoid in the division, and to want to go out there and take his O, to go in there. And I think that Ian's putting all his best foot forward here. I think the YouTube channel that he's kind of revived, showcasing his kind of family life. So I think that's all works well for him. Additionally, we've seen Charles Oliveira coming out and kind of talking about him, and how much of a beloved figure he is within the sport. So I think that works in his favor. And he's also, I noticed him saying a couple of things to Ariel on the MMA hour there around, he was asked about, the interim title, should this be for an interim title, etc. And he's like, he's just kind of, I feel like he's saying the right things. He's like, what's a belt, like, to show him the second best? He wants to be the best. He wants to win this welterweight title and move on up. So if you can go out here and you can actually deliver on your goals and your words, you can't, he's undeniable. If he goes out here and beats Shavkat Rakhmonov, he is absolutely undeniable and should be fighting for the title next, in my opinion.
Without a doubt. Caoilte, when these two guys square off, I haven't had the chance, obviously, at the recording of this podcast. We'll be doing a preview on the SevereMMA channel a little bit later on in the week. Probably will be out tomorrow at the time you're listening to this. An overall blueprint of how I can see Ian Garry, without getting into the intricacies of analytics here, is to point fight. You've got a point fight Shavkat Rakhmonov. Yeah. And I think, a lot of fighters will go out and they'll have an ego and they will, they'll want to entertain. And when you want to entertain, you kind of lay over to the side, reasonable consequences of being entertainment, which is obviously being entertaining. You could have more of a chance of losing this fight if you go out and stand toe to toe, if you don't fight technically. And I think Ian Garry showed that against MVP, that he doesn't care what the masses think. Yeah, okay, people will say that was a boring fight, but you know what? It was a fight that he won. And on his record, it shows that he beat Michael Venom Page. And I think he's got to do the same here against Shavkat Rakhmonov, who's going to move forward, who's going to want to land killer shots. But if Ian can utilize his footwork and he can pick his jab and fight Shavkat Rakhmonov on the outside and bring him into the later rounds, I feel that that's a good blueprint for success here in this fight.
You took the words right out of my mouth with the dragging to the later rounds there, because that's exactly what I think. Drag this fight out as long as possible. Point fight, use the cage. Don't get caught up against it. Circle off as much as you can and land your strikes and just stick and move. Land your shots. Get out of there. Move about. Wear him down. Drag him to the trenches and see what the later rounds bring and what can be exposed in Rakhmonov's game in the later rounds. I think that's probably going to be the key there for Ian Garry in this fight. And I think people we know the UFC they want these exciting fights, knockouts, these bangers. We all want these incredibly amazing fights. But for a fighter, the most important thing is winning. And when you're in a situation where you're taking on the boogeyman in a few weeks with short notice and potential title on the line or a title shot on the line, winning is the most important thing. And I can't imagine he's as concerned going out there and putting on this big flashy performance of hunting a KO or whatever and so on. I could be wrong, but the most important thing I imagine for him would be just winning. And going to take this in another direction there is look at the champion. Bilal Muhammad has been renowned for
he's never finished anyone inside the UFC. I believe that was.
There you go.
I don't know whether that's true now or not, but I've heard that being said before. But I just threw that out there. I guess I should have checked that, but I don't believe he has any finishes inside the. Oh no, he finished Sean Brady, didn't he?
No, he had no knockouts. I think is the.
No knockouts. Yeah,
or something along the lines of that. But and he managed to get to the title by doing what he had to do. Just go in there and win.
You get to the title really, lads, by winning. You know what I mean? Not by
Just
any
get there
means
quicker.
necessary. Well,
By
yeah,
a couple of knockouts.
for sure. The knockouts will get you the good graces of Dana White, and will get you that title shot. In certain ways, some people might look at this as, let's throw Ian against Shavkat as a somewhat of a punishment for maybe not being in exciting fights. But I don't know whether the UFC.
I think I said something similar a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
I might have to take all that back now.
That'd be my question, is like, obviously the last fight that Ian had was against MVP, and we've often, you kind of it could have been expected, that type of fight where, they're going to feel each other out, and, wasn't necessarily going to be the most, car crash entertaining fight that some fans crave, as possible. Shavkat doesn't tend to make or allow fights to be boring. So do you think Ian will be able to, it's all well and good of saying, this is what he needs to do, but will Shavkat allow him to do that? Would be my question. Or will, we've seen photos of Ian coming out with, cuts or scratches at least under his eye, and on one hand you look at that and think, oh, this isn't good before a fight, and on the other hand you think, well, has he been getting into the trenches and getting into some wars in preparation for an absolute barn burner here against Shavkat?
Well, I think you have to prepare that way if you're going in against a guy like Shavkat. I think Shavkat is going to go for the jugular straight from the first bell here, and it will be, to me, can Ian Garry weather the early storm? When we've seen Ian Garry hurt inside the octagon before, it's going to be down to Ian Garry to remain focused, concentrated, and on point, because if he's not at any moment in this fight, and this is elite level mixed martial arts at the end of the day, he's going to get caught and he is going to get finished, or he might get submitted. But if he does remain on point, he's one thing that we don't give Ian Garry enough credit for is his fight IQ and his ability to game plan. He attacks people at their weakness and takes away their strength by doing that all in the one, and it's fantastic to watch. Now, will he have had enough time to work out what shots in a period of 3 weeks? Some people might say no. Other people might say that his experience and maybe getting some work with him at Killcliff in the past would have given him a little extra boost on what to expect when he comes in, and eventually, because he's had to have it in his mind, lads, that he would have to face off Shavkat Rakhmonov at some stage of his career. So I think getting in there, getting the looks in Killcliff is a very important factor for him to kind of game plan towards this fight. And if it's not to be, well, it's still a kind of a win-win situation, because he took on the boogeyman of the division. He took him on short notice, and he'll be saying, look, I tried, to dare is to do. And but I mean, it'll be sensational if he can go out there and get the job done, and I think there's a damn good chance that he can, if he gets past the first 2 rounds and he has the ability to bring Shavkat into the later championship rounds. I think he has the ability to take this fight. Now, I don't think he goes out there and finishes Shavkat. I think the only way Ian Garry, in my opinion, wins is probably by on the scorecards. Maybe if he tries to take him down and utilize his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, might be another opportunity. But I see Ian Garry, look, I fucking thought he was going to go out and calf kick MVP too at the same time, and he did quite the opposite. So it could be, my opinion, I think in this one, he's got to fight on the outside. He's got to just land 1s and 2 punches and just outscore him and frustrate Shavkat. And when Shavkat would possibly get frustrated, that's where he might overreach. That's where more shots will open up for Ian Garry. It's a fascinating fight. And this is going to be, whether you think it's exciting or whether you think it's not going to be exciting or whatever the fight is, what this is extreme high-level mixed martial arts. And I love these type of fights, but the fact that we have an Irishman stuck in the mix here, it just makes it all that more special, I think, for all of us.
It's a humongous fight. It's an absolutely humongous fight. That the biggest fight outside of Conor McGregor that Ireland has ever had in MMA. In my opinion, I know we talked about it, but Paul, you were there not too long ago. But this is it. This is the biggest fight, and I'm forgetting about Irish MMA. From an MMA sport perspective, this is one of the best fights. You're talking 2 undefeated guys going at it, with probably going for the belt next.
I can't remember the last time that we've had two high profile fighters that have put their undefeated records on against each other. Now, we definitely have had that, but I can't remember in recent memory two fighters. I mean, you're talking about a 15-0 and an 18-0. I mean, we might have seen a couple of fighters at like 5 and 6-0 taking on each other, but like this is high profile, title eliminator. You know, two of the rising young prospects in the welterweight division in the UFC. I mean, it's ticking off all the boxes.
Yeah, I don't. It's not. This may be a complete reach, but and obviously he wasn't undefeated. But you know, when the fight that got away, the Tony Ferguson versus Khabib, where you had the win streak versus the undefeated fighter. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't. I never.
The same.
Yeah, I never thought but
yeah.
I understand what you're saying. I never thought that fight was going to be competitive. So
yeah,
I wasn't getting that excited about it. But I mean, very, very good stuff. I mean, yeah, fair play to Ian. It'll be interesting to see how he gets it done. Like I said, we'll break down that fight and other fights in more detail on the preview show this week on the SevereMMA channel as well. I think we'll call it a day on this one, guys. Obviously, a different podcast. Unless there's anything that we want to kind of sneak through the cracks here to finish us off.
Maybe just to mention just the what's upcoming, and then we'll talk about it in the next podcast. So like, there's an card coming up, some great fights on it. We've got LFL, so Andreas Binder's fighting for the title over in LFL this coming weekend. Owen Sheridan, I think, is fighting in PFL coming up soon. I actually can't remember if that's this weekend or the following one.
December 14th in Leon against Bryce Balaxi.
Right, so that'll be before we next record. And on that card that Andreas Binder is fighting on for that title, we've got George Grozav and Janderson Castro both competing on it too. So as we mentioned, or a heap of fights on that. You can go over to their page, you can see them all. But Kieran Brady, Jamie McAleese, Dara Toman, Dillian Douglas fighting a pro, a bunch of title fights on amateur, and look, we'll chat about all that on the next episode.
Absolutely. We'll break all of those fights and all that news down in great detail on the next episode of the Ould Triangle. Thank you for listening. We appreciate always the support. And one thing I guess that I would like to kind of circle back around on the Conor McGregor interview, or the interview we did with Clodagh, was there was a little bit of uncertainty around the timeline for an appeal process. But I've just gotten information that it's 28 days from the ruling that an appeal has to take place. So I just wanted to circle back around because I know there was a little bit of confusion at the time. We just want to make sure we get all of our details correct. Just to kind of reiterate about the start of the podcast, we're doing our absolute best to navigate a very difficult circumstance here in the world of Irish mixed martial arts and mixed martial arts in general. We appreciate everybody listening in. We did our best with that topic, and we will be back to talking all things Irish mixed martial arts again on the next episode of the Ould Triangle. The only thing that is left for us to do is for Caoilte to see us out.
Garry Meaney agus slán go fóill.